Which conspiracy theory came out real? A man named John Wojnowski used to stand outside the Vatican embassy the 90s in Washington, D.C. with a sign saying that the Pope is hiding pedophile priests. He claimed to be a victim of such abuse. People would honk and throw insults junk at him and call him crazy. The FBI tracking Ernest Hemingway. He became paranoid that they were tracking him. Turns out they were watching him. Do you remember why? I'm curious Edit. My best comment is about Ernest Hemingway and the CIA, thanks Reddit. In yet another twist, Hemingway was an actual spy for the Soviets. Not much of a good one, mind you. He formed these relationships prior to WWII and during the war, and he never passed much to the Soviets because he never knew anything. But he is documented under NKVD records as actively working for them in WWII. As far as I've found, by the end of WWII he wasn't really working for them anymore, but expressed fear that he would be targeted for the relationship for doing a few favors. Prior to the release of the NKVD documentation, this was known but not actually thought beyond a couple occasional bit of networking and running in the same circles as socialists in the US. That he was an actual documented Soviet agent came as a big surprise. The government is spying on you. Oh spooky. Then Prism came out and indeed the government is spying on you. I'm an engineer, semi-related to the story, a guy I worked with years before the Snowden realization would tape over his laptop camera, disable mics, etc. He was thought to be a crazy tinfoil conspiracy guy. Turns out he worked on some small portions of black projects much earlier in his career and started doing this ever since those years. President Nixon was so paranoid at the end of his administration that people dismissed out of hand his claim, on tape, that the Pentagon was spying on him. Turns out, they were doing exactly that. I'm so curious on how much spying was done on President Trump now. The CIA used military personnel with diagnoses of everything from depression to PTSD and even schizophrenia as guinea pigs for experimental medicines and treatments. They once gave a group of mentally ill men massive doses of LSD and left them all in a room for several days just to see what would happen. One survivor wrote that he spent those days perceiving the other men as living corpses and that the walls were covered in blood. There is no accurate number for how many people were killed or otherwise traumatized for life. Project MKUltra began in 1953 and continued for 20 years, only finally being dismantled in 1973. Edit. I didn't expect this to gain so much attention. If you're interested in Project MKUltra and the other horrific governmental goings on of the 60s to the 80s, look into reading Poisoner in Chief by Stephen Kinzer, or Operation Mind Control by Walter Bauert. The film Jacob's Ladder is also inspired by accounts of soldiers subjected to this treatment. Crashgate. In a nutshell, Fernando Alonso is starting the 2008 Singapore Grand Prix from quite a bad position, actually. The normal strategy when in a competitive car starting at the back is to load her up with fuel and go as far as you can into the race before pitting. Weirdly, Alonso is instead one of the first to pit. The only possible way this can work is if the safety car comes out due to how the rules are enforced. Well, exactly one lap later, Alonso's teammate has a big crash into the wall and brings out the safety car, allowing Alonso to go on and win. At the time, many were accusing Alonso's Renault team of fixing the result due to how convenient it was for the safety car to come out at exactly the right time after the other car crashed. But hey, that's just a coincidence, right? It wasn't a coincidence. It turned out Alonso's teammate was indeed told to crash by the team principal to benefit the team by scoring a win. This all came out in 2009, after the second driver lost his seat for not being quick enough. That Apple purposely makes their old phone slower. The Panama Papers. I mean, we all suspected it was happening. The whistleblower for that died in a car bombing and that got hardly any coverage at all. Some corrections. She was a writer journalist working on exposing the political corruption of her homeland, Malta. John Doe, the actual whistleblower, is alive as far as I'm aware of. In addition to the Panama Papers, she was also heavily involved in exposing the mafia's relationship with the Maltese political sphere, which had granted her threats and severe tension with both factions before the bombing. The news had international reach and her work was finished by journalists from all over the world. There were arrests, protests, monuments made in her honor, and the Prime Minister resigned. It's true that all of this was ducked up and that the bad guys were assured they were going to get away with this, but this statement in particular is wrong, and undermines the sacrifices made by Caruana Galizia. One you've never heard of? There were tales at my high school of the 100 Hall, where all the halls with numbered rooms and lockers started at 200 and went up, so there was no 100 Hall. The wild story was that it's underground, built to be a bomb shelter with stored non-perishables, and had entrances in the auditorium and gym. Turns out, absolutely true. The one aspect of it that didn't pan out was the attached tunnel that led to the science building at the local university. Epstein's Island was called a conspiracy theory for over 20 years before it was found to be true. The CIA FBI knew about Epstein for decades. They let him operate because he was something of an intelligence asset. But, like all those kinds of relationships, eventually the party with the ultimate advantage decides the relationship is no longer valuable. Cue the FBI formally raiding his compound. Scientology's invasion on the US government. Project Snow White. Scientology is scary. An untaxed and regulated cult that has so much money and resources that have to buy buildings and leave them empty so they don't have as many billions in their accounts. Hiding assets. Have turned at least one town into a ghost town by buying buildings for offices or something. Having no actual use, and leaving towns full of empty buildings. They will spy on you high moving PPL and next door. They have so many lawyers, politicians, police, influential celebrities in their pocket. I think the former face of Scientology said they sent people to knock on every door in his neighborhood to warn them he's a pedophile. The power, reach and money is terrifying. Edit. Thanks for the upvotes and so much good info everyone. I have a lot to research. So far, me and my pets are still alive. Will update if I get assassinated. P. Also, it was awesome seeing the empty Scientology building in your areas. MK Ultra, Operation Paperclip. What's Operation Paperclip? After WW2, the Americans brought over some of the Nazi scientists to help the technological advances in the US. One of the main guys at NASA who helped the Americans get to the moon was a Nazi rocket scientist. He ran a rocket factory where Jews were forced to work. I heard somewhere that every day he would hang the slowest working Jews in the factory to motivate the others. The Americans knew about this but did not give a shit because they wanted to win the space race. Crack epidemic was fueled and facilitated by the CIA. Documents came out proving the connection between Central American drug use for gums deals and distribution, though freeway across in LA in the 80s. Half of America is built on drug money. All of Florida at least. They did turn the frogs gay. Sorta. Patrice O'Neal has a great bit about Alex Jones that kinda made a lot of sense. Essentially, Alex Jones and guys like Farrakhan shove marbles up their ass. They speak the truth but they surround it with a bunch of crazy nonsense. For every 9 things they say one that you can verify. So you'll be listening and be like, that doesn't sound right, let me Google it. Wow, they did introduce crack into black communities. But he does also shove marbles up his ass. I can't do it justice and it got taken off YouTube. Alex Jones was telling us about the frogs and Epstein, but he was also shoving marbles up his ass. Think the Parkland thing, or FEMA camps, vaccines etc. The FBI and local law enforcement stalked, harassed, and blackmailed MLK Jr. They tried to get him to kill himself. They assassinated a leader of the Black Panthers in Chicago and then concocted bogus criminal charges against all the witnesses of the mayor dare to lock them up and discredit them. They had undercover Leos infiltrate basically every single social justice movement and had a whole playbook based around how to make those movements look more radical, violent, dangerous than they actually are to discredit them. Undercover officers and confidential informants at protests throw bricks or try to start violence. Local law enforcement, prosecutors, and the FBI all lied to judges, juries, grand juries, legislatures, and Congress saying they never did things like this. People had to break into an FBI field office and steal documents to prove they were actually doing this stuff, and had to keep their identity secret for decades so they wouldn't be prosecuted or persecuted for their actions. And the FBI and local law enforcement still do this stuff, but everyone acts like they don't. COINTELPRO will change the way you look at media, government, and law enforcement. The British royal family being deeply involved in an elite pedophile ring. Turned out only one was a pedophile and the rest were just happy for him to get on with it. False flags. There are conspiracy theorists that call 911 a false flag attack, and while they're definitely wrong about that, probably, false flag attacks themselves are not unprecedented. Operation Northwoods was proposed inside the US Department of Defense that didn't come into fruition, but it called for CIA operatives to commit terrorist attacks against US citizens, Cuban immigrants, US military sites in order to justify going to war with Cuba. The US government is on record for considering the possibility of attacking its own soil to further their interests. An attempted false flag attack that actually happened that I could think of was by the Israeli government in the Lavon affair. The Israeli government had Egyptian Jews plant bombs in Egyptian American British-owned civilian target with the intent of blaming it on Egyptian communists, the Muslim Brotherhood, etc., with the hope that American British governments would think the Egyptian Nasser government was unreliable for their financial support. Thankfully no one died as a direct result of the bombings and the spiring was later uncovered, but what made this false flag event special enough for me to remember was that the surviving Israeli agents of this event were later honored by the Israeli government, which I thought was really messed up given that the UK and the US are allies with the country. The CIA overthrew the democratically elected government of Iran to install a Shah, who was more friendly to the US in the 1950s. The tobacco industry silencing scientists and creating false studies to say smoking isn't harmful several decades ago. Soda companies did the same thing with sugar. The automotive and oil companies have been doing the same thing with climate change since at least the 1970s.